The Cable Guy is a black comedy released in 1996, directed by Ben Stiller.
It stars Jim Carrey as the titular cable guy, who goes by the name of Chip Douglas, and it's a story of him and sort of friendship with Matthew Broderick's character, who's called Stephen. Stephen's just broken up with his girlfriend, or sort of temporarily split up with her. She's played by Leslie Mann, and he's moved out of their sort of shared place, and he's got his own pad while they sort of try and work out their problems. And yeah, so he's getting cable installed. Chip turns up to install it. And earlier, right at the start of the film, Jack Black plays a friend of Stephen. He suggests to him that he offers the cable guy $50 to give him all the channels, all the movie channels and everything for free. So just before Chip's about to leave, he does this. He hooks him up, but then he kind of clearly wants a friend, shall we say, and suggests that they hang out. He says, "Oh, I'll show you the satellite that feeds all these cables." And he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, okay." Not thinking that he will come, or lo and behold, the next day he arrives. "Come on, let's go see the satellite." So he reluctantly goes with him, and they sort of, they form a bit of a friendship, even though Chip's a bit of an oddball. I guess Stephen feels a little bit sorry for him. It starts to go a little bit strange. Chip buys him loads of home entertainment gear, or doesn't buy it, he gifts it to him. Doesn't really tell him how he's got it. He has lots of preferred customers, obviously people that have probably given him a few dollars to hook them up with all these channels. So he says he's got it through one of these people. Yeah, he then sort of inserts himself into Stephen's life more and more. He turns up at a basketball court where he's playing basketball with his friends. Sort of makes friends with his ex-girlfriend. And it starts to get more and more odd and sort of creepy, for want of a better word.
It's like a send-up of all those. In the 90s, you had a lot of films like Single White Female and
Hand that Rocks the Cradle, and
Hand that Rocks the Cradle, Fatal Attraction, I suppose,
Yeah.
Pacific Heights,
Yep.
Unlawful Entry, the Ray Liotta one. So that kind of, you befriend someone, you let them into your home, and then they turn a bit psychotic. Bit of a psychopath. So it's that with kind of this absurdist humour thrown in as well. And I used to love those kind of films. I was a big fan of Pacific Heights and and Unlawful Entry. I love those two specific. And also 1 Hour Photo. Do you remember the Robin Williams one?
Yeah, Robin Williams.
Where he plays a psychotic he works in a camera shop, doesn't he? For some reason, I think they're just good. They make good kind of horror thrillers. Not really horror, but more thriller. And I just love that whole, because I think we've all met people that you think, oh, it could be friendly, but then you're kind of like, oh, I'm quite glad I'm not.
Yeah, there's just something about them you think, I'm not quite sure about you. There's just something not quite
exactly.
right.
And I think it clearly plays on the fact that, and I think it plays on the fact that in the 90s it's kind of more TV, and this is obviously cable TV. But a lot of it rings true today with the internet and that whole idea that, the human race can get very lonely at times. People need friends, and that's kind of what this film is about. But then, of course, it goes a bit wacky when Jim Carrey comes along, because he's a bit wacky.
Yeah, I mean, he gives it his all, doesn't he? I mean, Chip's he's sort of got an underbite, hasn't he? So his jaw juts out a bit, and he talks with a lisp. And when he first arrives at Stephen's apartment, he's looking for the sort of the cable that's already in the wall. I guess he's looking to where to hook it up, and he's got some sixth sense or something.
Yeah.
And he sort of fondles the wall, and then when he finds the sweet spot, he like goes ooh, and fondles it. So he's immediately Stephen's like, what is this guy doing?
I really like this. I haven't seen this. Hadn't seen this for years, but I watched it a lot when it came out. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, similar to we did Judgment Night last week. It has a good soundtrack for a start.
It does actually. I'd forgotten. Yeah,
it's got some good songs on there. It's got bands like Filter are on there. White Zombie are on there. Silverchair, the Australian Nirvana.
Joe Cantrell.
Yeah, Joe Cantrell from Alice in Chains. He's on there as well. So it's got a good soundtrack. And I mean, I think a lot of people, we like Jim Carrey in the 90s. Obviously, his big films, The Mask and Ace Ventura, Liar, things like that. So, I enjoyed. I didn't watch them a lot, actually. I watched this one more. I think because this was more, I suppose, in tune with what I liked in cinema, that kind of absurdist. and of course sending up that kind of stalker film as well. So for me, this worked really well, and I always got a kick out of it. I watched this a lot when I was younger. I had it on VHS.
I say I watched Ace Ventura a lot. Don't know why. I just loved it.
That's probably his most famous, and that's the one that really kind of set him off to stardom. But this is quite famous for this one, because I think he was like one of the first actors to get a huge payout of it, because he got like $20 million, which is a lot of money. And because I think the film itself only cost like $48 million.
Yeah, I think he basically got half the budget.
Pretty much.
So, well, I mean, yeah, at the time he was a huge name, wasn't he? So I guess he could command that, and that's what he got.
I think he does it. I mean, I think he's great in it. I mean, he's completely nuts anyway, and he's one of those actors I'm sure must be kind of a lot of fun to work with, but also a bit of a nightmare to work with, because he's kind of, his brain's like constantly going, coming up with ideas left, right, and centre. It's got some really great scenes in there. It's quite a very memorable film, and of course it's an early one from. It's directed by Ben Stiller, of course, who himself went on to be, very, very, very famous, and he's in it as well. He's kind of this. There's this running joke through a running skit through the film where Ben Stiller plays. He's in a court case, because he plays like a child star. He's a child star who's now grown up. And him and his brother were these child stars, and he's now apparently murdered his brother, and he's like going to the trial. So I mean, it's again. I mean, we've covered films similar where they kind of use the media, and they send up the media, or they reference the media. Things like The Chase that we did, and that's here too. So you've got that kind of running in the background, and they might, turn on the channel or flick over to the channel.
I think this is probably saying a similar thing about TV, the obsession with it. I mean, obviously it's a little bit dated now, because at the time there wasn't the internet particularly and things like that. So TV was the main thing that people would get addicted to. Whereas now, there's all sorts of other things, other screens that people can stare at and look at different things. But at the time, TV was becoming a problem where people would just get obsessed with things. I mean, I think this was not long after the O.J. Simpson trial. Which of course people were obsessed with and spent hours glued in front of the TV watching. So and again, like The Chase was sort of a similar thing, with this obsession with news and tracking every minute of a story, no matter how dull.
It's all over this one, and there's so many references in this as well to TV and to films as well. I have to say, I found it a little bit similar to Scrooged. There's a scene in this when he has a flashback to his childhood, and it's very similar to a scene in The Scrooge. When you also see his childhood, because he's sitting there just kind of staring at the TV, and obviously Bill Murray's character in that film is also completely obsessed with TV, and that's how his life is now. So there's quite a few actors in this so he had a show called The Ben Stiller Show, and I'd not seen that before. It's not something I've ever seen in this country, but I was kind of doing a bit of a research on that. So there's quite a few actors I think he tried to put all the actors that he had in the Ben Stiller Show in this. So I'm sure there are people out there that recognise a lot more than I did in there. But is it Janine Gruffalo? She's one of them. She plays a waitress.
There's loads of names that are big now in comedy that sort of were just before they hit the big time, like Owen Wilson, and obviously I mentioned Jack Black earlier. This was quite early on in his career, and he almost plays a straight man in this. He's not really playing a funny character particularly. Bob Odenkirk, who, I mean, he barely has any lines in this, but he's obviously famous now for Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. You got David Cross, who I don't think has any lines in this, but again, quite a big name in comedy. You've got Eric Roberts in there, who is playing. He's like, there's a TV movie of Ben Stiller's character court case, so it's like a dramatisation before the trial is even finished. They've made a TV movie of it, and Eric Roberts is playing Ben Stiller and his twin. There's Charles Napier, there's Carl Gass, who of course was in Tenacious D with Jack Black. So yeah, loads of comedy faces that just crop up in there.
I can't remember when I saw this, because there's also Reality Bites he made, which was his first directed film. Excellent film with Ethan Hawke and Winona Ryder. That was a couple of years, I think, before this one. I think that may be 92, 93. But he seemed to know. I mean, he kind of come from. He's a bit of I think he went on to Saturday Night Live. He'd started making mockumentaries, kind of in the mid 80s, and then he went on to Saturday Night Live, but he was only on 4 episodes because he wanted to kind of carry on making these mockumentary type things, but they wouldn't let him. They just wanted him to do what they wanted him to do, so he only lasted for 4 episodes. But he did some really interesting stuff, and again, I just looked at this today. He did quite a few, comedy mockumentaries or comedy. He did quite a few of these mockumentaries, and one I found on YouTube. It's called Elvis Stories. It's hilarious. It's like a send up. It's based on Elvis sighting stories that you would find in tabloid newspapers, and it's quite off the wall and quite. I mean, I don't know. It's not really off the wall, but it's quite. I don't know. It's an interesting kind of humour, but it's got Jeremy Piven in there, who of course was in Judgment Night that we talked about last week. John Cusack is in there. Mike Myers is in there. Very funny, very, really interesting. So I think, Ben Stiller clearly was, doing a lot of groundwork coming up before he did his movies. I mean, he's famous. His father is Jerry Stiller, who was a big comedian, actor. This is really good. I really enjoy this film. It's quite wacky, but it follows. It's that interesting plot that I enjoy. If you like those kind of stalker films of the 90s.
I mean, at the time, I don't think it did very well with the critics, because obviously they were expecting, a standard Jim Carrey comedy, and it's obviously not that. He's playing a much darker character.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it did all right at the box office. Obviously, made his money back, but I think even audiences were I think a lot of people don't really like it because of it's not your typical Jim Carrey flick. It was the start of him showing that I'm not all about just standard comedy vehicles. I want to do other stuff and go a bit darker, and do things like Man on the Moon and Eternal Sunshine and Truman Show and things like that. So just to show that he had a bit more, he wasn't just a one-trick pony. He could do other things, and this definitely showed that.
He's such a versatile actor, and I think this possibly was that. Yeah, maybe that film that showed him, because he's not full. I mean, he's pretty zany and wacky in this film, but he's got that. He's playing it. He's not completely playing it for laughs. There is that darkness in there, and although it doesn't go maybe as psychotic as some of those actual stalker film does, it gets quite dark at times. There's a really great moment where he phones him up and he's just kind of lying somewhere. He's lying down and his voice is very, there's not much emotion in his voice. And then this spider crawls over his face as well, and he's doing this kind of weird he's just his voice is just very monotonous in that role in that sequence.
I mean, that's straight out of something like Pacific Heights, isn't it? That
completely.
Isn't there a similar shot like that? I can't remember. I don't know, but
there's also the bit in the car park where he does the from Friday the 13th as well. Yeah. I mean, if you love those kind of films, if you love those stalker films, if you like horror films, then there's enough in here to kind of make you go, oh yeah, I know where that's from. So if you love all those kind of 80s, 90s films, then I reckon you'd get something from this, definitely. And I saw it, so I watched it on Amazon Prime. If you're in Britain, you can watch it. I think it popped up recently, free on Amazon Prime. But you have it on Blu-ray, do you?
I do, yeah. I mean, I had the DVD years ago, but I picked up the Blu-ray a couple of years ago. I hadn't got around to watching it, but now I have. But the DVD didn't have any extra. I think it had the trailer on it. That was it. But this is stacked with stuff. It's got commentary and deleted scenes and gag reel and all sorts of stuff on it. Even the Jerry Cantrell music video. And also, I didn't realise until I looked into it earlier with the DVD in the UK anyway was cut, because I think it had headbutts and ear claps and all. BBFC did not like those. So yeah, but they're reinstated for this, because I thought there was I won't say where, there is a fight scene where I saw the ear claps. I was like, oh, I don't remember that. Obviously that's probably the first time I'd actually seen the ear claps.
Yeah, because on Amazon Prime that's in there as well, and the headbutt too, and I didn't remember that, and then reading about it afterwards, yeah, it said in the UK they weren't happy about that. I don't know.
Well, no, I mean another Ben Stiller film that suffered at the hands of the BBFC for that was Mystery Men. That had an ear clap in it as well. Now that got chopped out. So they were not a fan of
well, no, they weren't a fan of that here, because I remember back in the in the night, it was either the late 90s. There was an advert that had was it like Tango or which had a kind of ear clap thing, and they banned the advert because they were worried kids were going to go around doing that to people in the street. I don't know what it is with us and ear clapping. We must really hate it over here. I don't know. Maybe it was linked to that. Who knows?
Don't see it much anymore.
You don't see it much anymore. No,
it was big in the 90s.
Big in the 90s, yeah, along with the headbutt and...
Yeah.
Yeah, bands that sound like Nirvana. So that was The Cable Guy, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button there, and don't forget to push the bell for notifications. There's other videos to check out over here. Come and find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and join us next week for another video.